So shall we start?
Yeah. You can start. I think it's 4. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. A warm good evening to all the participants. On behalf of Faculty of Architecture, Dr.MGR Educational and Research Institute, Madurai, Chennai. Introducing myself, Architect Mohanapriya, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Architecture. Takes privilege in welcoming you all for our webinar series, Session 5, on topic Laurie Baker and his vision on sustainability. Here we have with us an eminent speaker for our evening session, Dr.Benny Kuriakose, who's well known throughout India and outside too. He's a Chennai-based architect who had started his career in 1984. He has been providing his expertise to the various state governments and associated with various other organizations as a conservation consultant. He believes in the functionality, sustainability, and cost effectiveness as the most important factor of design. As we all know, he's known for his vernacular design, who has been inspired by our legendary Indian architect Laurie Baker and translated his philosophies many times. Today he's here with us to share his early experiences working with a legend and his own mentor Laurie Baker, and to talk about his visions on sustainability. We welcome you, sir, and I request you to take forward the session.
Okay. Thanks, Mohanapriya. I think it is audible, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. See, when Laurie Baker, when I worked with him in 1984, there was not, sustainability was not a word at all. I mean, nobody used to talk about sustainability. Or when Baker practiced mostly in the 70s and 80s, it was mostly, environment itself more common in the 70s and 80s. So,
sir, 1 minute. I think people are not able to hear properly. We'll just check once.
Just check.
Actually, I'm able to hear you, but
yeah, but others are not.
Others are not able to hear.
Just see. I don't know, but I don't think anything with my setting. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but they say audio is okay, everything is okay. But one person said they can't hear you.
Okay. I don't know why it is happening. Huh?
Yeah, I think they can hear, sir. I think they can hear.
Okay, that's fine.
It's audible. Yes, sir. We can proceed.
Okay. So when Baker practiced in the 70s, the environment was a word, but it was most used in connection with the natural environment. So when I worked with Baker in 1984, I was very lucky to get placed under him because hardly, so I was the 4th person to work under him. He was 67 at that age, and only 3 people has worked before me. And I met him accidentally. I don't have a degree in architecture. I'm not an architect. But I met him accidentally and asked him, can I spend some time with you? Because I liked him more as a person and what he was doing. And so I just thought, I did not know what I will do after I finish my degree. So I was doing my degree at that time. And I just thought I'll just at least try to learn something from him. That was the idea. I never thought I will be able to design buildings, or I will come to this stage when I started working with him. I have no intention of doing it. I just wanted to spend 2 or 3 months with him, learn how he is working, because he is very innovative. But at that time, people did not see like that much, because that is why I became the 4th person to work under him. The first person to work under him was Gerard de Cuna. And then there was a person called Ramesh from Goa. He's still practicing in Goa. And the 3rd person was one Thomas from the local engineering college, or the Trivandrum Engineering College. Apart from that, hardly, nobody has worked with him. So so I was very lucky to work with him and learn under his principles. And what I am today, or what I practice today, is mostly taking his principles, learning from him. I used to have a lot of interactions with him. I worked with him only for 9 months, but that 9 months was really a very, very high quality period. I did not know ABCD of architecture when I joined him. and worked with him for this period, 9 months, but I could learn so many things in a completely different way, not the way somebody learns in an architecture school. So that way it was very, very useful for me. And I'm just going to talk about what he was practicing, what his thoughts were. I think many of the present day people might not be knowing him to that extent. They might see him as a person who is doing exposed brickwork buildings, who used to build with nature. But he was a person who did what he believed in. He always used to wear only khadi shirts and khadi dresses, and never seen even a single time wearing any other kind of dress. So he was a person who believed, who practiced what he did. And for him, all the architecture, whatever he did was the same, whether he did for the, I'm not able to move into the next slide. Just let me,
Yeah, it's moving, sir. It's moving, yes.
Yeah. So I'm just quote from one of his statements that he made, which symbolizes his philosophy overall. One is that is what I would rather see 1 million houses that are only 200 square feet made of mud and thatch than one more high-rise building, even if it was necessary. Hardly he has done any high-rise buildings. He never believed in that. Definitely, he was very well known. A lot of people would have approached him for all kinds of buildings because his architectural designs were quite beautiful, very successful. But he never took any commissions or any of that nature. So he always did what he believed in. And this sentence summarizes what he did. Now, going back to his life story, he grew up in Birmingham. And as a child, he used to say that every Sunday, his father was an accountant, and he was a choir master in the church also. His mother was an organist. So music was in his blood. And as a child, every Sunday, he was not allowed to play any games or anything. He was always taken to churches. And his father was interested in churches. So he used to go from one cathedral to another cathedral. That was his father's thing as a child. He said that he did not like it in the beginning much, like many of us. We don't like certain things in the beginning, but later on we get attracted to it. So Laurie Baker was not very much interested in the beginning, but later on he got interested. So this is one of the sketches which he has made. He has drawn himself, and that is what I put it in the thing. So when he finished his school, I mean, a lot of people advised him to take architecture, including the headmaster of the school in which he studied. He went to the Birmingham School of Architecture, and they said that it is better to join for architecture. And that's how he joins architecture. He takes his degree in 1938. He was 21 years old when he took the degree. And but, in 1939, the Second World War broke out. So what has happened is that his family were believing in the Methodist Church, which was a very different kind of beliefs. And in between, when he was a child, they switched over to Quakerism. And Quakers were against wars. They were peace-loving people. It was a minority community. There are the Quaker. There in Chennai also there is a Quaker house and Quaker hall, etc. And if you want to know, in 1947, Quakerism was given the Nobel Prize for Peace. So Baker, as a child, grew up, had strong beliefs on the Quakerism. He was against the war. And when the war broke out, he did not want to join the army. At that time, every British citizen has to join the army. So he had to go to the court and tell that I don't believe in wars. I don't believe in two countries fighting against each other. He has to give an affidavit, oath taking, all those things. And the court allowed him or permitted him not to take part in the war. So he was exempted from joining the British Army. But the court said that if you are not joining the British Army, you should join the missionary service. So he had to join the Friends Ambulance Unit. That was what it was called. So he joined the Friends Ambulance Unit, and the Friends Ambulance Unit sent him to China. He went to China, and he worked in various capacities. Worked as a driver. He worked as a person treating leprosy patients, and he had to do all kinds of things as part of the Friends Ambulance Unit. So he was in China for a few years. But then when the war came to an end, he decided to return to UK. So on the way back, at that time, returning to UK, the flights were not that common. The ship was the most common way of going back to UK. So he came back to Bombay. And at that time, everybody wanted, it's like COVID, every migrant labor wants to return to their native village. No trains, no buses. So it was the same kind of situation there. So he had to wait for the ship, and he had to stay in Bombay. So he stayed in Bombay for 2 or 3 months. One of his friends, or his host, I think, decided to take him to Mahatma Gandhi. And he met Mahatma Gandhi, who was later on became the father of the nation. This might have been in 1944 or 1945. I don't remember exactly which period. And according to him, Mahatma Gandhi told him, you have higher qualifications. Higher qualification. You are an architect. You have a degree in architecture from the Birmingham School of Architecture. So you are a highly learned person. But unless you work in the villages and work among the rural people, your degree is of no value. So something like this is what Gandhiji has told him, because Gandhiji always believed that India lives in its villages. So, now I think many of the Gandhian principles will become valid even now. And that is, it is going to become valid. So it influenced him. Gandhiji influenced him. And Gandhiji at that time told him that if he can come back to India, India needs you. Indian villages needs you. If you can come back to India, please come and work here. So this was in 1944 or 45, which happened. Now in this situation, there are 2 sentences I would like to what Gandhiji. In 1909, in his book called Hind Swaraj, Gandhiji mentioned that the world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. Since he met Gandhiji in Bombay, I think Baker became a Gandhian. And it fitted with his vision, Quaker beliefs, and that is why he was very simple in his life. He was not a sahib, he was not a sir. The British, you had to see that those were the days before the freedom was given to India. So this Gandhiji's influence influenced him so much. And this is another statement which Gandhiji very often, Baker very often used to quote. The architecture of each place had used materials which are available within a radius of 5 miles. That all should be local materials. And I tried to look when Gandhiji has said this. I could not find any reference where Gandhiji has said it, but it is there in the internet quite a bit, but Baker has said it. So I think he would have told to Laurie Baker that it should be made within materials, which is very sustainable principle. Gandhiji was very sustainable. Baker, who followed him, is also very sustainable. So all these principles influenced him. And he went back to UK. And immediately after the war, when things were settling slowly, he found an advertisement and applied for the job. It was a job for an architect to work in India among the leprosy patients. He already got exposure. At that time, we had to understand the medicine for leprosy was just discovered. And it was not very commonly used. And so there was the missionaries were very active in India trying to set up leprosy hospital all across India. Some of those hospitals, I mean, some of your parents and grandparents will tell you that there was a leprosy hospital here. Now leprosy is more or less eradicated kind of thing, but those hospitals are converted into normal hospitals, etc. So Baker's job was to work with the leprosy patients. And these missionaries did not have proper buildings. The missionaries had some old buildings which had to be converted into a leprosy hospital. So Baker's job was to convert them into leprosy hospital. So he traveled across India. And one thing which he said, he used to tell me is that he found that whatever things he learned in his Birmingham School of Architecture were all useless. And he tried to meet up with the engineers and architects. Architects would have been very few at that time, but engineers would have been very common. And many of them were not able to give answers to many of the questions. For example, he said he has never learned or heard the word laterite, which is available in Orissa, Goa, parts of Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, quite a bit of Kerala, etc. He said that he is learning about many of the things. He is learning about how to construct in using earth while doing it in practice. He said, I have found in villages people using all kinds of timber, which, I mean, it's not the way the buildings are being built in UK. So he had to find all these places, convert them into hospitals, and he learned quite a bit in this process. He said, I learned from the masons and carpenters. He said, I looked at them, how they are building the houses, what knowledge they are having, although this language barrier was there, and he learned all these things. And during all these times, he did not try to live a life of a sahib or at that time, the Britishers used to have a particular lifestyle, because this is before the freedom movement, before India got the freedom. They were called sahibs. And the Britishers were, I mean, he used to tell, British was never supposed to go in a bicycle, which Baker got definitely. He said, I rode around in a bicycle, but the custom, he has been advised by many of the people to go around in horses, which was the trend, which was the sahib's vehicle, bicycle. Although bicycle would have been very costly at that time, he just used he had the bicycle, he never used to do that. Now, most of these photographs in my talk, everything is done by, the sketches are done by him. The photographs is that of the buildings which he has constructed. And but I'm not going to talk about the buildings which he has done, because that is not the topic. And he had a friend who was a doctor treating from leprosy patients. He was from Kerala. His name was Dr. Chandi. And Baker became very friendly with him. He was staying in Faizabad in UP at that time, Uttar Pradesh at that time. So one day he was asked to bring Dr. Chandi's sister from the railway station. Dr. Chandi's sister was coming for a vacation to her brother's place. She was a medical student at that time, Dr. Elizabeth. I mean, she has not become a Dr. Elizabeth. And Chandi asked Laurie Baker to bring her to the hospital, because Chandi had some emergency, so that he couldn't go to the railway station and pick up Elizabeth from the railway station. So Baker, I mean, more or less, according to him, he fell in love at the first sight itself. I mean, in that journey from the railway station to the Chandi's residence, I mean, he says that I fell in love with things. But all of us, we never used to call Baker as sir or any of those words. We used to call him daddy, and Dr. Elizabeth was mummy to us. I mean, so we had a very, very kind of informal relationship when we worked with him. Even all the laborers, all the masons, all the carpenters, all the coolies, watchmen, everybody used to call him daddy. That was the accepted word. Everybody used to call Dr. Elizabeth as mummy. But daddy used to call mummy as Coney. So that was. And what started there became, I mean, they finally got married in 1948 August. And the marriage happened in Pallavaram in Chennai. It's very close, because the wedding was supposed to take place before 1948 August. But at that time, what what has happened, Baker could not reach on time. You know, those transportation, everything. There was the Telangana struggle going on, so Baker could not reach Kareem Nagar where the wedding was supposed to take place. So the wedding did not happen. Finally, it happened in Pallavaram, in just on the outs. I mean, it's part of the Chennai metropolitan, but at that time it was on the outskirts of the Chennai corporation. So that's how they got married in 1948 August. And their love, I mean, they were so close to each other. I mean, I've seen them in such a kind of relationship, which, I mean, you hardly see in many other cases. Many other cases. I mean, they're such a good relationship, and both of them respected each other quite a bit. And when they got married, and Baker was asked to, told by one of his friends who was running a leprosy hospital in Pithoragarh. I mean, Pithoragarh means it's not like the present Pithoragarh. You had to walk for a week or 2 weeks to reach the place. There was nothing. Post, everything will come very late. It was more or less near the Chinese border and or Tibetan border. So it is very difficult to reach, but both of them decided to take, I mean, the doctor had to come back to the plane, so he had to leave the hospital. So they just took a substitute. They were substitute for 2 weeks at that hospital to go, kind of thing, 2 weeks or 1 month. But what they decided to spend a month became few years. I mean, they just decided to spend. They just went there. It was a leprosy hospital, but Dr. Elizabeth took deliveries of children. They looked after the other patients. They were equivalent to that of a god. But there was no architecture to be done in Pithoragarh, in such a remote place. So what he did, he became a nurse, he became an anesthetist, he became a sweeper, he became a building maintenance engineer, and he built a hospital for them, where 30 patients could be admitted to the hospital. So it was a small, not a very small hospital, and no materials available. Only stone was available, no cement, no steel, nothing of that sort. Any of the modern materials are not available. So they built those buildings. Even the roofs of the building was built with, this is the sketch which Laurie Baker has made of the place. The roof was also built with stone and timber. The walls were made with mud and stones, or earth and stone. And the walls were also, the foundation was also made. Everything had to be carried. And Baker has sketched his life during that period. I think he has made a lot of sketches, which he has made. I mean, one advantage of his thing, all the places he went, he made a lot of sketches. So all these years till 1962, they were there till 1962. What they might have gone there in 1948 or 49. So 13 years or 14 years, what has happened? 1962, the China war broke out. I mean, their land was taken over by the government, and they had to leave the place, and they had to shift from Pithoragarh. And when they came back, they decided to settle up in the hills in the Western Ghats, a place called Vagaman, which is, near to Thekadi, or not very near, it's in the same district. So up in the hills where there were very few people. And there was some German missionaries who were working here. There was a small hospital there, or clinic you can call it. So, a hospital building was made. The hospital building should be still there. I seen it few years ago. And so they just started a life of, they started their life in Kerala. That happened in 1962 or 63. And he used to speak Hindi reasonably well. He can communicate in Hindi reasonably well. Malayalam, his knowledge was very poor. He can hardly say 1, 2, 3, 4 in Malayalam, or he can say mortar, or for pan, he will just say chatti. Very few words he used to talk about these things. His knowledge, Malayalam knowledge is he said that once he was asked to, when he was traveling by bus, Baker used to travel by bus, coming up from the hills into the plane. So he said he had to tell the destination. Iratupeta was in the plane. So he said, he tried to say Iratupeta, and he said Iratupeta. Then he said, everybody in the bus started laughing the way he said Iratupeta, which is a place name where he wanted to get down. As he said, after everybody started laughing, he decided not to do much of these things. Now, the photographs that you see on the left is his house, the hamlet, where he lived in Trivandrum, which is there. So all are small buildings. So the next few slides will show some of the some parts of the hamlet. I've taken these photographs 30 years ago or 35 years ago. So things would have changed by now, or certain things would have been added by now. And one of the things is that he was very concerned about the poor people. He says, so one of the famous statements, he said, they don't have anything which can be called architecture. And he believed that we as architects, professionals who are highly trained, have to do something to meet these things. He always used to say there are 20 million families in India without an, I'm talking about 1984. Now the figure is cross 50 million. And yes, still we hope that it will be solved by 2022. Another 2 years from now, we will solve the housing problem. We have not even touched the fringe of the housing problem. And he said that it is a shame that we allow these figures to increase. So we are allowed, the building profession in India has allowed these numbers to increase from 20 million to 50 million. So in say 35 years or any of those things. And the way he worked, there was no office, no peon, no computer, no draftsman, no supervisors, no accountants, no detailed drawings. A table in his office, in his house, is the office. And he used to make the drawings himself. All these people who worked under him, we never drew even a single drawing. I did not know how to make a drawing because I did not study any architecture. But even the others who have never did even a single drawing. Only after Cosford was formed and various organizations were formed, things began to spread a little bit more. His argument is that when I take 15 minutes to draw a plan, why should I waste have an assistant draftsman to do it? Or have another assistant architect to do it. That is the way he used to do the drawings was never think if he wants to draw an arch, he will take the steel tape, which we even have now 2 meters. He will take the 2 meter steel tape, which comes in a round, and he will draw. He never used to, I don't think he used any T-square or, and he never used any stencils to make any text. He freehand texting. This is what was given because Trivandrum Corporation needs drawing to be submitted. So he used to write with his handwriting. There will be the basic sections, basic elevations, and basic plan, and that is what he did. And he is one architect who designed and constructed. So he went to the site almost every day, and each of his projects were completely different. He never repeated the designs. And that's one day when I was working with him, that is in 1984, he came to me and told me, Benny, today I've completed. When I say I am at the site always. He comes to the site. Some days he will not come. Some days he will come. So we expect that he will come. He'll come because that is the learning experience for us to learn from him. So one day he came and said, today I completed the 1,000 houses in and around Trivandrum. So he built quite a bit, although it's a wrong concept to say that if one is going to design and build, then one will not be able to do many projects. No, Baker was able to design. He was the accountant. He paid the laborers. He paid the masons. He made the carpenters. So all these things, all the designs were made. None of us, including me, Gerard or Ramesh or Thomas or anybody who worked with him, none of us made any. What we used to work for Laurie Baker, we did any drawings or any of those things. So he never believed in handing over because he said he believed that people are coming for a Laurie Baker house. It will be cheating the clients if I hand over any of the work to my assistants or co-worker. That was the thing. And he always used to say, I think the way I think and nobody can else nobody can think like Laurie Baker, thank goodness. I mean, so he believed in it. He did all these things. He used to come to the site because all the techniques, exposed brickwork was not common in Kerala at all at that time. He was the person who introduced the exposed brickwork. He was the person to introduce sloping concrete roofs. At that time in Kerala, when he did sloping concrete roofs, all the buildings in Kerala were flat concrete roofs. There was nobody doing arches. There was a time when people used to do arches, but Baker reintroduced the brick arches into the Kerala architectural scene of building, and the people took it. I mean, this is, the left side is the photographs. What you see at the bottom left-hand side photograph is the part of the living room, a bay window. You can see, and all these tiles and everything is recycled. Most of the things he has collected from demolished buildings. And Baker believed in craftsmanship. He respected them. And he used to communicate with them. The carpenters understood his language. The masons understood his language. Although because many of the sites, there were no supervisors, no architects, nothing, no drawings, nothing. So he had to go and explain to them how it has to be done. And he used to explain, and people used to accept that. And that is how things happen. And I think his buildings reflected sincerity and truthfulness. And the designs were very beautiful. That is why if his buildings were not looking nice, if the architectural planning was not good, he would not have been in great demand. He was in great demand and he could do. And he was such a very polite, he was very short-tempered. He will get angry sometimes. Sometimes, but he immediately apologized. He doesn't keep anything to his mind. Typical English gentleman way of doing things. This is, some letters where he said, sorry for not coming. I'm suffering from an overdose. Because when I was working, he was 67. I had a bypass in 67. This is 1984. But he was very active in the design field for the next 20 years at least. So he was, although his health was a problem, and you can see that in the letter he says, so I'm sending, I think it was Rustam with the black oxide and cash. This is 600 enclosed. Hope all is okay. I mean, he used to pay. If he couldn't come, the building construction doesn't stop. He used to buy black oxide, red oxide, cement, everything he used to buy. There was not even a single staff. You can't imagine how he built 1,000 houses in such a short time. How he tried to do more and more buildings in the future. And that was the great tremendous passion, tremendous energy. All these things was very much on his thing. And first floor is the guest room of his house. And the ground floor, I mean, there were 2-3 living areas, depending on the visitor. I mean, not depending on the thing. I mean, depending on the mood and everything, we used to sit in different places, talk to each other. And this thing. The left side is a church which Baker has designed, and it was a temple church because he took the form from the temples of Kerala. The Kerala temples, the sanctum sanctorum on the Sri Kovil or the used to be circular. But there are, I mean, not all the temples. There are many temples which are circular in shape, which is very unique to Kerala. I mean, it's not there in the other parts of India. Maybe 1 or 2 temples in Rajasthan, perhaps, I was told. But in Kerala, we had the circular sanctum sanctorum. So he made the church when he had to do, and people used to call temple church. But unfortunately, the church was demolished a few years ago. Baker believed in cost reduction. And he did only one style of houses. He never had low-cost houses, which he does for the poor people, or for some housing projects. And for the rich people, he does another kind of architecture. He had only one kind of style or one kind of architecture. And that was the greatest thing in him. And especially when you look at the fact that architectural fees is linked with the percentage of the things. I mean, there is no incentive for the architects. If the construction cost is reduced by 20% according to the present standards, the architect's fees will also come down by 20%. But he had a different concept altogether. He believed in cost reduction, and that is what he did to the thing. And I think one of the other things we did, he brought in a human touch to architecture. Building which was getting away from the architects. we just buildings designing just happened on the drawing boards, and the architects did not know what is happening at the site. And he brought that human touch. He interacted with everybody in the building trade. He talked to them. He handled all those things, and he did it without any problem, any issues, and single-handedly managed. And he used to tell, can one call the person who make 500 similar houses an architect? That is, he said every house, because I'm designing one for Mohan Singh, another one for Shankar. So each house has to be separate. And he has done houses for the very poor. None of these houses exist now, or if they don't exist in the form which is there. These are the fishermen's housing, which he did when the poor fishermen's houses were taken over by the sea erosion. And he has built these houses using all these filler slab technique. The houses where he did the retired Delhi Vice Chancellor's house, the same technique is used in the fisherman houses. Exposed brickwork, same winter timber, same filler slab. Everything is the same black oxide flooring inside and outside, and that is what Baker. Nobody can be like him. I don't think. I mean, there is hardly anybody who can. Hardly anybody who can be like Laurie Baker. He was down to earth, and he believed, as I said, he lived like a Gandhian. One instance I will give. He came to Thrissur to give a talk. That's the first time he's coming for a Cosford meeting, and his room was arranged in the state government guest house, and he got the best room, this famous architect. And the guest house people thought that before he comes, they switched on all the air conditioning so that when he comes, the room will be cool. So I picked him up from the railway station, and we reached the guest house. We walked into the guest house and guest house room, and he said, "Why do you need AC now when the climate is so pleasant outside? Let us open all the windows." The guest house people were very shocked. Nobody in India will do like that. I will not do like that. 99% of the people will not do. He was such a down-to-earth person who did not want any of the comforts, who was very down, who could do that. And that was a very, very important aspect of him. And it's a shame that there are so many people without anything which can be offered. So he has done so many houses for the poor, as well as for the rich, as well as did all these institutional buildings. And he was concerned about the housing problem. One of the other incidents which I remember happened before I joined him. The government of India asked him to give a consultancy in Delhi, speak him at a conference or a meeting, and to how to solve the housing problem and the poor people's houses. And what he wrote to the government of India was that at that time, the airfare used to be 6,000 rupees from Trivandrum to Delhi and Delhi back. He said, "Give me that 6,000 rupees, I will do one more house." He never went after publicity. He never wanted fame. He said, and this is what he told them. And he never went for it. Everything came in search of him. And he always used to say that poor people, they want a place to sleep, they want water, sanitation, and a smokeless chula. He tried to see their problem instead of just building and giving to them. He tried to see the problem in an integrated manner. And that is what he tried to do. He was very clear. When you understand how they eke out their little incomes, a lot for food, a little for clothes, nothing for shelter, nothing for emergencies, they don't have any holidays. Then he says, once you know this reality, we'll be able to think differently and plan differently. And that is what Baker was. He tried to, he always said, I never had the opportunity to be a Paka architect. And there was a time when everybody used to tell him that he's a quack, his buildings will not last for. I have attended meetings where learned engineers told that his buildings will not last for more than a year or two. The buildings, even after 25 years, 30 years, or 40 years, the building is still standing now. So he was able to, right from the beginning, he said that he could not design like a conventional putting it. And as I said earlier, for him, the locos was not only for the poor, but also for the rich. The important question which is to be asked is that, is it necessary? If it is not, then don't do it. His buildings, whether at the south elevation or the west elevation or the any side elevation, it will be beautiful. He did not do, he was not an elevation architect. Now you see many of our clients are like that. They come and ask for a particular thing. We give tremendous importance to the front elevation. For him, it was like not like that. He never designed. He was quite democratic, but at the same time, he did not follow everything which a client will tell him. So he reduced waste. When you do not do something, we reduce waste. And he did what he preached. In every respect, not only in building, its personal life, everything was like that. And avoiding waste is one of the important principles of the sustainable architecture. Use the minimum is the main rule which has to be there. And he was just trying to, what you see on the right hand side is a ladies hostel he built in the Trivandrum city, Loyola Ladies Hostel. And he always said, I am designing buildings not to create monuments. I don't want a Laurie Baker building. I want a Mohan Singh building or a Lashmi Priya building. So he was very particular that the building should reflect the individuality of the clients, and that is what he tried to do. Of course, we call it Laurie Baker style, Laurie Baker, all those things we call it, but he never wanted it. He never promoted it or any of those things. He was never tried to put up a monument of any of those things. So this is the ladies hostel which you see on the right. Left hand side bottom is a church cum auditorium. That means there is a church and auditorium in one building block, which is there. So he used the brick jalis. The brick jalis were cheaper because bricks are saved. The doors and windows are 10 times as costly as the bricks as a superstructure. And when you do exposed brickwork, you save on plastering and painting. And repeatedly, all these buildings doesn't have to be painted after 5 years or 7 years, because most of the paints, although say will last for a lifetime, you buy it and apply it after 4-5 years of 3 rains, the paints will get the fungal growth and all those things. And he tried to use these things in a very, very imaginative way. There was some time when the deadlines used to irritate him. So once, somebody had a housewarming next week, but Baker has not designed the front door. So he was telling me, so I'm getting so irritated. He cannot have a housewarming without the front door. So he used to do many of the things at his pace. So if you ask me whether the buildings were completed strictly on time in the best possible way, no. But it was not bad. So because it was one person who had to think. He says, for me to design a front door for that client, I need time. I want to give him a unique door. I just don't want to take some design and give it to him. So I need time to think. So he said, oh, I have to go and design his front door. Otherwise, he won't be able to have the housewarming. One day when he was leaving the site, this is what he used to say. And he used to experiment quite a bit. And Jalis, he used to change. He's told that the brick Jalis can take so many. What he did was that he copied or he got inspired from the stone Jalis in Fatehpur Sikri or Red Fort or Taj Mahal or many of those places. He got inspired by the timber Jalis which were there in the Kerala temples and, say, for example, Palmavaram Palace. And he said, I can't afford the stone Jalis nor the timber Jalis, so I will use the brick Jalis. And he was very, very, very important. He did not want to cut trees. Many times you will find a tree growing inside a building. And he's used to say, we must plant before we plan. That was one of his famous statements. And once the journalist asked him, how do you get these different shapes? He goes for all these different shapes. He said that here is a tree, there are 2 trees there, and I don't want to cut, so the building has to take this shape. So that's the way which he used to say. So he was very much concerned. It's not that no trees were not cut. Trees were cut sometimes while we were working, because I got an opportunity to work in many projects under him, only learn from him. There was no working I did for him. So it is quite interesting to know that. He used concrete. There were many buildings. For example, this is the Center for Development Studies entrance lobby, where there was a 7-story building. That might be the the tallest building on the multi-story building he would have ever done. And in the front portion, I mean, the same building, Center for Development Studies, he has used concrete as a cantilevering feature. He always believed that we should use the 20th century. Now, I'm saying 20th century. Now we are in the 21st century, but I'm saying it 20th century know-how should be applied in solving the problems. He says we work on empirical methods. Whatever we learn from the colleges or textbooks or many of these things, we don't apply it in the field. So he said we should try to apply it. So he used concrete, but in a limited way. I mean, for example, this is a building which is 3-storied, where we have used 4.5-inch brickwork, half brickwork, to do, because 4.5 brickwork will not take load, but this is a load-bearing wall, and he used to take these curves and things, which is a folded shapes, which strengthens the wall. So he said there is no excuse for over-designing, because you can calculate everything. And he had a very good engineering sense. Although he was trained as an architect, there were structural engineers involved in some projects, not in all the projects. For example, in the 6-story building, there was a structural engineer involved. But most of his residences and small projects, he did not involve any structural engineers. He had knowledge, but he, at the same time, there is no excuse for over designing. One of the reasons why many of our buildings are not sustainable is because we over design or do many of these things. What you see on the left is a film studio, Kerala's first film studio, one of the earliest, might not be the first, but first film studio in the cooperative sector he has designed. I mean, these are the buildings, but it was taken over by the Air Force. I hope that building will still be there, but I've just taken these photographs when the film studio has stopped functioning. That is why you find that it looks like not being used much. He said if you put the buildings which are designed in Latin America, Germany, India, and Indonesia, all of them look the same. He said our ways of living are different, climate is different, materials are different. Why don't we have different kind of buildings? This is what he was very particular about this thing. He said, we are very Western by our way of thinking, not by our way of living. So this is very important. And he believed in the Indian style of architecture. He said there is no Indian style of modern architecture. But at the same time, he said we should be designing as Indians for Indians in India. This was one of his famous statements. We should be designing us Indians for Indians in India. And he said, we have such an incredibly beautiful architecture, indigenous architecture, and we should add to the value of it, not by destroying. He was very much against the destruction of old buildings. There were many times when he came out in the open against the destruction of many historic buildings in Trivandrum. And he also used to say many of the buildings which are being built now has nothing to do with the normal life of a Keralite. They are very Western, or it doesn't reflect climate, it doesn't reflect the materials which are available. These are sketches of some of the buildings which he has done in Trivandrum, in the historic city of Trivandrum. And this is one building, I don't remember this building, but this has been demolished when I might have been a small child. But he said this building used to be there on the airport. One day it was suddenly being demolished. And he also said that beauty is related to truth. A stone should look like a stone. He never believed in cladding. He never believed in doing the brickwork, plastering it, and again cladding it with brick. He said that the use of the materials in a truthful way will make the building. And also he believed that beauty is not something which is applied afterwards. And he said that the building should change according to the times, according to the day. But most of our buildings looks the same, whether it is the morning or lunch or evening. The light and shade changes. He said the building doesn't capture many of these things. And with the Cosford, his spread of technology came with the Cosford. Cosford was formed in 1985 by former Chief Minister Achyuta Menon, Dr. K.N. Raj, Dr. M.P. Parameswaran, and Mr. Chandradas was the director. After it was formed, I also joined as the joint director, which was one of my early assignments. I was one of the first persons, technical person to join Cosford, and these were the 3 first buildings done by Cosford. And we did a 3-day camp in a paddy field, and 3 houses were with the first one on the left was built with burn bricks. The one on the left was built with stone, which was quarried from the same place. And then the third house was the bottom portion is with mud bricks, and the top portion is with burn bricks. So we just built these 3 houses in a village, and where we try to train so many people, architects and engineers and students and other people. And Baker's technology started getting popularized with that workshop or a camp which Cosford has done, and that made a lot of changes in at least in the Kerala building scene. Baker used to do a lot of cartoons. It's quite safe. He was against nuclear reactors. He has even written a poem against the nuclear reactors, he said. And he said Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister at that time. Rajiv ji says it is water cooled, and he has put a fence around it, around an atomic reactor. So he used to do this as a pastime. He has done a lot of cartoons, and a lot of his cartoons used to be from the hospital scene, because he has grew up in, he has spent a lot of time in hospitals. He said, "Wake up, here is your sleeping field." All these cartoons are sketched by Laurie Baker himself. And the right side, which is very true, you see in the government hospital, screens for privacy. So he had this thing, and he was multi-talented. A lot of paintings he has done, sketches he has done. He used to do sketches so fast, and that is one of the way he communicates with the labor force, because we did not know any English. He hardly knew any Malayalam, so he had to convey to them in a sketch. Both of them understood. Each one will shake their heads, and that is how it has to be happen. His contribution is not in creating a style of architecture or technology. He was an architect who built what he believed. And the biggest contribution, he was able to influence a generation of architects who are mostly young at that time. Who has spread his ideology and technology, who were completely influenced him. He was able to do. I don't think even Charles Correa or B.V. Doshi has done to that extent. But Baker was able to create a whole generation of youngsters. Still, people are being trained in his concepts and ideology, and that is it. And the most important thing is that when we Indians were building in a completely alien style of architecture, he showed to us that there is another way of creating architecture. And that architecture is what we call a sustainable architecture today. He was ahead of his times. He did not call it sustainable architecture, but the architecture he did was suitable to the climate. He used local materials. His techniques were highly labor intensive. He reused materials. He used lime. He used suki. So and many of his materials can still be recycled. He did a lot of buildings with earth. So all these techniques, which we call as part of society, he was not following any mono. Where stone was available, use stone for the buildings. Where earth was available, use earth for the building. So and he built in only one style. For him, he will do sustainable building, and he will do the other kind of costly building. If a rich client comes, he was able to say no, which 99.99% of the present day generation is not able to do. This is what he. So he showed to us Indians, although he was not an Indian by birth, he is more Indianized than any one of us, and he created us a beautiful architecture. He showed us a way, and I'm happy that a lot of people follow his principles and build all over India. He practiced mostly in Trivandrum. His buildings were centered around Trivandrum, although he has built on other parts of India as well. But the technology got spread in different parts of the country and even outside India. I see some buildings and people mentioning his name, etc. Okay, that's all. And if any questions are there, we will try to answer.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us a wonderful and enlightening session to talk about our legendary architect and taking us inside the vision on sustainable architecture, explaining all his design philosophies and ideas, and showcasing all interesting projects. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and it's really an inspiration to all of us. I think there are a few questions posted. I've noted down. I'll go one by one, sir.
Yeah, right.
What are your current views on current vernacular buildings with respect to materials, construction techniques, etc.?
You see, the definition of sustainability has undergone a lot of changes over the years. For example, when Laurie, one of the things, there was a study done by a Cambridge University professor. He has written some articles about Laurie Baker. He was a professor. I met him in Cambridge University. I gave a talk in Cambridge University once also. Robin Spence is his name. He did a study on Baker technology in the 1970s. And what he said was that Baker's use of technology, say Baker used lime for the mortar, I mean, in the early period of his buildings, and which is very energy saving. Use more labor intensive technique, which is very much in the which is also very energy saving. But over a period of time, the labor has become more expensive. There is a huge shortage of labor and materials also. You can't have a same rule applicable. Baker has did in one of the buildings, which, well, not one building, 2 or 3 projects which have done, he has used bamboo as the reinforcement. Now, bamboo is available all over India, but still what he did it in the 1980s, even now people are not using, although the tensile strength of steel and bamboo is more or less the same, but people don't use it. There is might be other issues connected. So Baker used all these techniques and the vernacular techniques, vernacular materials, and he used extensive use of timber in many of his projects. But it will undergo changes depending on the location and all those things. So you have to see the use of each of the material and then do. For example, I've written one article for a Malayalam architectural magazine. It will come in the June issue, first week of June it will come. And I will post the English article once it appears in the Malayalam media. One of the things, for example, granite or stone, which was supposed to be a locally made material, local building material, available locally all over Kerala. It is available, but the environmental impact has made it unusable because the problems created by the quarries, how it leads to the landslides. So there are a lot of studies which are coming out because of that. So we have to be very careful about how we use all the materials. Even when timber is used, timber is considered to be the most sustainable building material now across the world. Everybody accepts that fact. But if you use timber from cutting down a natural forest or a virgin forest, then it is not sustainable to the same extent. But if you use a plantation timber, it is more sustainable. If you reuse old timber, it is even more sustainable. So there is this gradation of sustainability, which is a much, much wider issue, which unfortunately is not being taught. So it doesn't mean that all vernacular materials is sustainable. If somebody builds a wall with earth or mud, the cost of a building is 20% or 15 to 20% is the cost of the superstructure. So if somebody builds with mud and don't use any of the other techniques for the superstructure, finishing, flooring, roofing, foundation, then that building is not sustainable. You are using mud only for the walls. But here, the general belief what everybody thinks is that if you use mud and thatch, the building is more sustainable. I don't subscribe to that idea. So all vernacular materials need not be sustainable. And when you add cement to mud, it becomes less sustainable. It can still be sustainable, but it becomes less sustainable. So just don't get into the trap of if you use vernacular materials, everything is sustainable and those things. Of course, I got some benefits because people think that whatever I'm doing, since I use many of the vernacular techniques, whatever I'm doing is sustainable. It is not true. You have to look at each of the things and try to work out solutions. So you have to analyze each of the building as such. I hope you are the person who asked the question is able to understand the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, okay, sir. I'll go to the next question. Seeing the current COVID scenario and as advised for observing the new normal along with social distancing, what sustainable ideas would you suggest to the architecture fraternity?
See, I mean, COVID was a time when you got time to look at or think about what one was doing. I mean, social distancing, etc., will die down after some time. This is what I feel. But the architecture scene is going to undergo drastic changes. Unless we are able to cater to the changing times, one will not be relevant or whatever. For example, one of the things which is going to happen is that malls will die. Not because of the COVID alone. I mean, already the malls, 20% of the malls in US are closed. But we are still building new malls and malls. But if you look back, for example, the Spencer Plaza, the oldest mall in Chennai is not used now. No, there is not much demand. The prices are very low. The real estate prices have come down drastically. If you just Google, you will find a lot of articles on the death of malls in US. And TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, are already announced that by 2025, they will have shrink to 25% of the present of office space, or many of the offices will shrink. See, what is happening is that they have found that work from home has become very revenue generating. People don't have to spend time traveling. More monitoring measures of getting the proper output will come, which means that a person will have to come to the office only once in a week. I'm also allowing some of my staff to work from home, whom I'm able to monitor the output very clearly. I have not given that benefit to all, but somebody who does work, even if you don't see them, has been given. So if it is there, I don't have to find so many laptops. I don't have to have, if my office space has 25 people can sit in my office, I can employ 40 people in such a case, which means this is going to make a huge difference. Office spaces. If offices are going to shrink, you don't have to stay in Chennai. You can stay in Salem and come to Chennai every day and go back in the evening. So one has to see. So the apartments will not do. So there are a lot of changes which I'm expecting. I've said it in one webinar, which I gave in April, that reverse migration will happen. I mean, it might be foolish to say that reverse migration, people will migrate from cities to the rural areas. Everybody will laugh at it because the whole thing is people are saying that cities are going to grow. But I think the reverse migration is going to happen. Things are going to change. And COVID is the biggest lesson that it is. It is not the social distancing which is going to be very important. There are a lot of other things which are going to happen as part of it. This is my take on it, but each of the others will have a different kind of opinion. But we will know what is going to happen in the built. I don't know. I'm not looking at what is going to happen to the other fields, but real estate and the built environment I've been trying to follow. So I don't agree with many of the observations which are coming. I have a different take on it, which I hope I'll be posting it in my website or Facebook page, etc. in the coming months, which is going to be there. I think people will migrate from cities into villages because you don't have internet connectivity. You don't have to be in the city anymore. I'm monitoring. I attended 2 weeks. My office is open. I attended the office only 2 days since then. During the last 2 weeks, only 2 days I attended the office. I'm doing the Zoom meeting and the Google Meet and Microsoft Team. I mean, meeting the clients like that. You don't need to be in the office. So things are going to change.
Okay. Next question, sir. Can you share one of your best memorable day with Baker, sir?
See, I had, it's a bit difficult. I said some of my experiences with Baker already in my talk. And I had so many experiences with him. And there are two small things. One is that when I met him and I started, can I come and work with you? His immediate reaction was, I don't have the money to pay you. If I have to pay you, I like to get it from the client and then pay you. This is the first reaction he said. And I said, I'm not interested in the payment, but I would like to know how you are working, how you are doing these things. Because that time, 1984, people were not talking much about Laurie Baker, especially architects were completely not only architects, engineers were also completely against him. But I just wanted, very curious to know what I can learn from him or learn. But when I joined him, every week he used to pay me along with the masons. The masons used to get 40 rupees. I also more or less used to get 40 rupees. So I was counted on a number of days I came to the site and I was paid accordingly. So at that time, I used to get 200 rupees a week, which worked out to be around 800 rupees a month, which is a good salary. If you had worked in some architect or engineers or worked in an office or this thing, they would have got the same salary. So I got that. That is one thing. And the second thing is that when I left him after 9 months, I never expected that I will be able to design even a 250 square feet building. But when I left him in 1985 February, there was nobody doing building like Laurie Baker. There was no habitat technology. There was no COSCO. There was no Arrowville. There were no building centers. Nobody was doing low-cost buildings or the typical kind of Baker buildings, which Baker was trying to do. So a lot of people asked me, who could not get access to Baker, whether I can do the buildings. Because I've learned how the buildings are being done. So I just decided to take up the projects. So I approached him and told him that many people are asking me to build. Can I go ahead with it? And will you? He said, you please go ahead. It is very important that you do the buildings. And every plan I used to draw, I used to take him and show it to him. One thing is that none of the architects who leaves an architectural office will try to do it. Engineers or architects will try to do it. But I did it because I did not know ABCD of architecture at that time. Even after I left him in 9 months, I did not have the confidence. So I took the plans to him. I used to draw it on a graph sheet because I did not know. I've never handled a rotring pen. I did not have any staff. All that I could do was to draw up a plan on a graph sheet, took it to him, and he used to tell me, don't do it like this. This will add to the cost. If you do like this. So all my initial buildings, I took it to him and he corrected it and that kind. Nobody will do that. So, and so there are a lot of these things. He was a great human being. I think he was a great architect, great designer, forget all those things. He was a Gandhian. He did what he did, but he was a great human being. And that is the most important part. It is very, very important. Being very human, and he did it very truthfully, that thing. So there are so many instances. I don't remember all of a sudden. Everything is memorable only. I used to cherish every second I spent with him, and that was every architect should work with a master like him. That should be the first job. If I had not met him, I would never have been anything like this in my career. I don't know where I would have been, but it changed my career completely.
Okay, that's very interesting, sir. Next question, sir. One of the participants is very curious to know which inspired him to invent the rat trap bond technique and which year he started using it.
Yeah. See, rat trap bond, when I was working with him, that is 1984, out of the 20 buildings he did, he would have used 2 or 3 buildings with rat trap bond. I'm just saying, he was not using rat trap bond extensively. He used the Flemish bond, which you will find in most of the photographs, because most of the photographs are from buildings which are more than 30 years. See, all these techniques, you see, filler slab is a technique which is used from before the First World War. Filler slab is not a new technique. None of the techniques were found out by Laurie Baker. Rat trap bond is a cavity wall technique, which was very commonly. Baker said it used to be used in UK where you wanted to prevent dampness from penetrating inside, you used to use this. So the cavity wall. And he found that cavity wall, he had a very good intuition or sense. I said he has a very good engineering sense. He had the confidence that this is going to stand, or he would have experimented all these years. I mean, he did not experiment all of a sudden. He introduced, so for example, he might have been introducing rat trap bond when I was working with him, because many of the earlier buildings, I don't find he using rat trap bond much. But when I did one of the, houses in IAS colony in Vattur Kavu, which where the rat trap bond was used. So, so he introduced it over a period of time. So all the techniques which he used were always techniques which have been used in one place or the other. Only thing is that he did it in such a way, people thought that it's done by him. And he always used to say like that only. I'm not trying to find out. He himself used to accept that fact. He said, Benny, I've not introduced, I've not found out anything. Only thing is the way I used it is what makes the things. But after Cosford came, Cosford should be credited with the spreading of the Baker technology or Baker principles and concepts more than anybody else. So I think rat trap bond were very much used, and later on some tests were conducted in Anna University, which was funded by HUTCO at that time. Scientific proofs were there for most of these things, and things were, many of the things were done very well at that time. It became much more popular. And scientific studies, engineering calculations were done much later. Because Baker did not have any engineering calculation for any of the things he was doing it. But later on, the engineering fraternity came out with calculation and said that these things are correct. So came with supporting factor, supporting engineering studies.
Okay. So there's two participant question about Jalis. So do you think Jalis, verandas, angans to create a microclimate sometimes a cause of security concern? And one more person has also asked about the Jali work. Don't you think there will be some problem about mosquitoes, insects, lizards problem because of the Jalis?
See, he has used Jalis extensively. You see, window serves few purposes. One is you can see outside. It allows wind to come in. It lets in light. Suppose you don't want to see outside. You want only light to come in and you want only the wind to come in, then Jalis can be used. And Jalis have been in use. I've seen in buildings which are 400 years old, 500 years old, stone Jalis and timber Jalis. Only thing Baker has done is timber Jalis. When there is a cost consideration, when you have to build and somebody doesn't have money, then he has to give. You see, there are, my wife is a doctor, there are injections which cost 1 lakh and 1.5 lakhs. If patient can afford that costly injection, then the doctors give a medicine which might have some side effects, but which is cheaper because this situation is very similar here. When the person cannot afford to have the windows and this thing, or where the windows is not a must. See, but Baker, another question which I've listened is that when the Jalis are given right from the floor level, there's snakes and some other insects will come. But when you give the Jali slightly higher, then these problems are not there. You have a window, you open the window, then also the mosquitoes and insects will come. So it is, you have to keep it closed. I've seen Jalis where people have put wire meshes and try to make it safe if they find a problem. So, so it is, so it doesn't say that, the Jalis must not be used. So Baker has used it in many of his buildings. That was one of his signature things. In a school building, what is the problem in using Jabrick Jalis? You allows in ventilation, it allows in light, and nobody is going to stay at night in those places. So mosquitoes is not a major issue there. So you are not going to air condition the classrooms of many of these classrooms. So the Jalis are fine. So you have to. It is our mindset which is the problem. And once you work with Baker, you will see his mindset changing. For example, in the guest room which I showed, there is an attached bathroom to the guest room, and there is no door between the guest room and the bathroom, attached bathroom. He says, anyway, who is going to stay in the guest room will be husband or wife. What is the point in having a door to the bathroom? So his principle was very different, but many others will not agree to those principles. But each is for each one to take. Baker had his strong likes, strong arguments, and he was not very particular. He was not very adamant in many of his arguments. He used to compromise on many of those things. So Jalis is one of his signature things.
Okay, sir. So there are a lot of questions poured in. Can I continue, sir?
You can just ask.
Yeah, okay. Baker was against the use of modern devices like AC, big glass windows, and considered it as a waste and against Indian climate. How much do clients understand this and the idea of sustainability?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, Baker was against the use of all modern devices like air conditioners, big glass windows, and considered it as a waste and against Indian climate. How much do clients understand this and the idea of sustainability?
See, when one was that Baker was not dead against some of the people where Baker has done the building. Some rooms were air conditioned. He might have been more adamant in the beginning of his career, but later on, for example, there were many houses where tiles were used. I mean, ceramic tiles were used, or mosaic was used. Mosaic was the equivalent to the Italian marble in the 70s and 80s. Initially, Baker did not allow any of these things, but later on, he used to compromise on some of these things. He used to allow the clients to have. The only thing is that if some client wanted to have some of these things, he will not do it. If he will do the black oxide flooring. So even when I was working with some of the projects, is some ceramic tiles or some of those things, he never used to do it. Or mosaic also, he did not use it. He did not prevent a person from coming and doing it, because mosaic was considered to be the expensive flooring in the 70s and early 80s at least. So he had a different take on it, kind of thing. See, the thing is that glass and all these things, he said he did not want to use much of these things because they were not suitable to the climate. Why do you want to use glass, let in all the heat and then air condition? So at that time, that sustainability principle was not there, but he was very much aware of the energy cost, kind of thing. You understand that energy part of it.
Yes,
So from a sustainability point of thing, we have to look at sustainability. We have to also have to look at how the society is changing. For example, the number of bathrooms have gone up over all these years. The size of the bedrooms have gone up all these years. When I did Mammootty's house in 1992, only the bedrooms were air conditioned. Now, when you do, some of the toilets are air conditioned, kitchens are air conditioned, all the living areas air conditioned. There has been some clients who wants even the veranda to be air conditioned. So it's the people are not realizing many of these facts, but it is time that we need to think about it and look towards sustainability in a bigger fashion. I think India is very much lagging behind in these respects, but slowly we will have to look at the sustainability issues.
Okay. Another question, sir. Did he use RCC columns embedded in the brick, or are all these examples of load-bearing structure which you showed in the presentation? How was the dampness from the ground solved, as a DPC cannot be seen in the photographs?
Okay. See, there are two things. One is that, of course, Baker used not RCC, you can't call it composite columns, you can say, brick and steel taking the load. So he used to make an outer ring with brick. Inside he will put 4 rods and some concrete. So the advantage of that is that you don't need shuttering or formwork. The masons themselves can do it. They do 1 feet of brickwork. allow it to settle, get the minimum strength, then they pour the concrete inside, raise it by another one or 2 feet, and then pour the concrete. So many of the buildings which you have seen, Baker has done like that, which is one thing which he used to use it very common. But the thing is that the size of the columns goes higher than that of what is required for a normal masonry or normal RCC column. So that is one thing which he has. He has used this as a combination quite a bit. That the combination of the concrete and the brick. Was there a second part to the question, or did I answer?
Yeah. How was the dampness from the ground solved, as DPC cannot be seen in the photographs?
Okay. See, that is true. See, most of the buildings in Kerala doesn't require a damp-proof course because of the climate. And the requirement of a damp-proof course is in certain particular climate and situation. If the groundwater table is very high, then it is required. But perhaps, and salt water is very much proven that if you see the buildings which are shown, they are all built with random rubble or granite, stone. And in most of the cases, sometimes cement is used, but in many of the buildings which Baker has done, even mud mortar is used in many of these buildings, because it is not the mortar which gives the strength, it is the packing, the way the packing of the stone is done is what gives strength to the foundation wall. And if any dampness comes from below, which is a major source, it will get evaporated at the foundations layer itself. It will not rise to the brickwork because there are a lot of gaps. It is not a, see, when you do a brickwork, plastered brickwork, and the water rises from below, it will rise further height till it is able to escape. But here, since it's a random rubble wall with a lot of, where the water is able to evaporate at the lowest level itself, the problem will not be very serious. I mean, it's not as simple as the way I try to say, but I try to say it in a very, very simple language. And rat trap bond is again something which is there, where the, I mean, he has done some projects where he used double walls, not rat trap bond can still be considered as a cavity wall, where you do 2 skins with a interconnecting length. He has used even double walls in some projects. Okay.
The next question, sir. 2 of the participants wants to know what kind of bricks has he used while we are talking about the bricks.
See, Baker has used country burn bricks, which is the cheapest brick which is available.
And also one participant has said, while we talk about the bricks, it takes a lot of soil, which takes years and years to be made again. What is your take on this, and how do we call it as a sustainable material? The same question about the bricks.
I'll come to that. Yeah. See, the first question I'll try to answer. Baker used the country burn bricks. He never used the wire cut bricks, which is a factory made or semi-factory made. So he used the cheapest bricks. The only thing he used to ensure, which should be ensured in all the construction sites, I mean, is to soak the bricks in water. I mean, your construction textbook will say that soaking the bricks is very important. So he used to soak the bricks. He used to ensure that it's properly done. If the brick is not properly burnt, it will not last. I mean, it will come into a powder when you soak it in the brick for, say, 2 hours or 3 hours or even more than that. So by ensuring this, he ensured that only good quality country burnt bricks are properly burnt bricks are used. If properly burnt bricks are used, it will last for quite a bit. It will last forever, I can say. I can say, depending on the maintenance and the other design details that you are going to say, because what we get from many of the archaeological excavation is burnt clay. I mean, you get, even after 2,000-year-old site, you get a lot of potteries and Indus Valley civilization or many of the things you get burnt clay as well. It's a very durable building material. It will last for a very, very long time. Now, the second part of the question which you are trying to ask is the sustainability part of it. Yeah. See, we need to have a building material which is sustainable, which is there. Baker used burn bricks quite a bit in of his projects. Of course, earth is much cheaper, and he has done earth buildings with concrete roofs. I mean, while I was working with him itself. So 1984, he has done earth buildings with concrete roofs, and but making the earth might not be practical in all the cases. For example, there are, but bricks are transported. Can't the earth be transported? Yes. To make an earthen building, there is more technical input and supervision required. And the burnt bricks is also an industry. When I mean, it's still it might be there. I don't know where child labor is used, families work, slavery is there. And how can you get a product 6 rupees a piece? A burn brick. Even now, I think the price will be 6 rupees or 7 rupees in Chennai. How can you get a product at that price? You know, that product is delivered at the site at this price. So, of course, the paddy fields are damaged. All those things, which is definitely true. That is why I say timber will be the future building material. Future, I mean, if we are going to solve the housing problem, it will be through timber. Baker used to say it will be earth, but I don't think it will be earth by which we solve the housing problem. It has to be based out of timber, because it's the only building material which can be renewed. Whereas earth, I mean, if you use earth for buildings also, you lose. The soil fertility is affected. You get these quarries or anything. I mean, there was a time when people did not think about the ecology or the environment, but now time has come that sustainability is to do with ecology and environment friendliness and all those things. And timber is the only building material. And when I say timber is not teak or these imported costly timber, I'm looking at the ordinary timber like eucalyptus or coconut timber or palm timber or any of those things, because that is the only way by which we can solve the 50 million houses. Of course, because we can still grow it again and again. And it is the only thing which will reduce the global warming tendency, because carbon is not emitted as carbon dioxide when you use timber for buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sir. Thank you. Is there any labor issues while we go with the traditional techniques?
See, people say that there are labor issues. I mean, that is what mostly the people say. But I don't agree with it. I always have got labor forced to do whatever I wanted to do. Because one biggest advantage of India is that still we have the skill of craftsmanship. It has not died completely. There are certain techniques which might have died or which is dwindling or less. But there are still people who can do any of the techniques. There are still people who can do all kinds of complicated timber roofs. There are still skills available who can do any kind of timber carving or stone carving. What we need in India now is to give enough work for these people and make sure that these people earn a good day's living. If we can ensure that they earn a good day's living, if us builders or engineers or architects, if we can ensure that they get a fair day's wages, none of these things, there will not be any shortage of any of these things at all. So give them work, use them in the buildings. For example, I use a lot of craftsmanship in my buildings. In many of my projects, I use it because I think you are conserving the crafts, you are conserving the traditional techniques, and you are making a tradition continue for a long time, which is very. So give them continuous work. You don't have to do any charity. They are not looking for charity. Give them work, and they will do. None of these techniques will die. Because I think at present everything seems to be doing a reasonable balance. It is important that the building profession comes out and avoids the exploitation of the labor force. Okay.
Can I go with the next question, sir?
Yeah.
What about the durability of these types of construction?
See, durability, I mean, it's a bit difficult to talk about it in detail now. But one thing I will tell is that none of the building materials has a durability issue. For example, there are some materials, for example, coconut thatch. If you do a building with coconut thatch, it will last for a year. But if you do with the typical thatch which you find in Tamil Nadu, that grass thatch made out of the grass, then it will last for about 3 to 4 years. But there are in UK and Indo, if you use the Indonesian grass, I mean, it will last for 12 years. So each to the building materials. For example, take earth, for example. There are hundreds of earth, thousands of earthen buildings in India, which are lasting for more than 100 years, 50 years, and all those things. So this notion of durability depends on how you maintain the building. I hope you are able to understand this point, how you are maintaining the building. But if you use the building, and for example, I will ask, this is one of the questions we ask in many of my talks. I ask my students or anybody, how long will the concrete roofs last? They will say 25 years, 50 years. Maximum, they will say 75 years. If we are designing buildings which are going to last 75 years, why should we teach people to do it? Our traditional buildings have lasted for 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. And we are designing buildings which are going to last 50 years. And many of the concrete buildings are in such a bad shape. When I studied my master's in conservation, there were 2 books. I mean, it was the top premium most institute across the world. We are students in my class, there were students from 17 countries. And there were only 2 books on concrete conservation in the library. Now you just Google in Amazon, put books and say concrete conservation, conservation of concrete, or repair of concrete, you will find hundreds of books. All of our concrete buildings requires, and the problem with the concrete buildings, the repairs are very expensive and costly. And traditional building materials, if you know the right kind of solution, how to do it, it is cheaper. But unfortunately, our engineers and architects are not taught about the traditional building materials, so they don't know how to repair. They say a old building, and they say demolish the building. And they build a concrete building which will not last even half of the period in which that traditional building has stood. But still, this is the technology which is being taught in colleges and schools, and engineers and architects are taught only about steel and concrete. So this is the situation. I mean, if we think that our concrete buildings are lost only 50 years or 75, why should we build it? We should go back to the traditional vernacular techniques, and that is the way it should be taught. I mean, it's a much larger issue, which cannot be. I mean, you need a detailed this thing to look at durability, how the buildings are durable, why certain buildings are durable, certain buildings are not durable. We have to look at much wider issues. Okay.
There are 6 to 7 more questions. Can I proceed?
Yeah. I'll be. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Why has Kerala turned away from him and his philosophy in this decade after his passing? The iconic Nambudri house was also knocked off to make way for flats. There is a small gap of believers, but the larger population still and even more aggressively believes in everything he taught us not to go for tiles, granite, cement, and so on.
Okay, no, but yeah, I'll try to answer that question. The Nambudiri house was pulled down because the biggest thing which drives the real estate now is money. Why the Nambudiri was brought down? Not because the building did not last or building required serious maintenance, difficult to maintain. I mean, what is replacing it is a flat apartment complex, which is replacing. It is very, very difficult to fight the, to do it. I mean, so that is why the Nambudiri building was not. Now, I don't think Kerala has gone back on its Laurie Baker principles. Now there are hundreds of youngsters who are doing buildings on Laurie Baker principles in Kerala. Habitat Technology is doing very well. Cosford has so many branches. They are doing so many buildings. So even after passing away of Laurie Baker, I think the number of buildings which are being built in Kerala is many more times than what Baker was, than what was being done in Laurie Baker's time. And also, we have to look at all kinds of things, and we have to look at the right kind of solutions to do it. I mean, Laurie Baker way of building is not the only way of building, doing sustainable buildings. There could be other methods of doing it. So we have to look at various aspects of sustainability and then trying to do it. That is why I said there are lots of youngsters who are very sincerely working. I went following his principles. Cosford is still continuing, not compromising anything on his principles, and it's great that it's still being continued. So I don't agree with the statement that after his passing away, his relevance has gone, or his people are not building buildings of his style. Even now, I get a lot of inquiries from Tamil Nadu or various parts of India. Can you do a Laurie Baker style building? Although Laurie Baker never believed in the Laurie Baker style. He always used to say, I don't want to have a style of my own. But people used to call Baker building, Baker building. That's how it is called. So his relevance is still there. His relevance is more now than what it was earlier.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Next question. So can you mention any one of the projects done by you using these sustainable materials?
See, what I've done a lot of buildings strictly according to Laurie Baker principles. I've done a lot of buildings. But so 1985, I did my first building. I used Laurie Baker style of building. And I never deviated from it or any of those things. Then in the early 90s, I decided that, I mean, at that time when I did the buildings in 1985, as I told earlier, there was no habitat technology, there was no Cosford and none of these people were there. Of course, Cosford was formed in 1985. I joined Cosford. First buildings of Cosford were completed in 1986. So all these people came much later. I'm not trying to say that I am the first or anything. I don't want any credit for it. But when it reached a particular stage, I decided to move out of the Laurie Baker style of building. I just wanted to take it to I just decided that I should not become a follower of Laurie Baker. I don't find fault with many of the architects, close my friends who follow Laurie Baker's principles strictly to the core. I decided try to explore and try to do it in a different way. But I would like to say that I'll still follow many of his principles. So, but I thought I have to take it to the next level. So if people watch my buildings or watch my projects or any of those things, it is because I deviated. Nobody knows the buildings I've done between 1985 and 1992 or 1993, which was, I did strictly according to Laurie Baker. But after that, I deviated. So all my projects like Dakshina Chitra, Mussoorie Heritage Project, Tsunami Rebuilding Housing, everything is a variation of that. But I did not use exposed brickwork. I mean, I've done, Dakshina Chitra is a project where I use exposed brickwork. There were other projects where even in Chennai, I've done exposed brickwork buildings, but I've deviated from it for my own reasons. So that is the reason. So it is important that you deviate from it. Why should everybody should become a follower? Baker never wanted everybody to be his followers. He used to tell you, go and explore yourself. That is the way he tried to do. Gerard de Cuna learned from Baker, but he is practicing quite different. He has used many of his buildings using stone. He has used laterite, which Baker has not used laterite much. Very little he has used, but Gerard has built with, de Cuna has built with laterite blocks as the building. So depending on this location, depending on the circumstance, depending on what you want to convey people. So even I tell my people working in don't follow me. You just have to learn from me and then explore yourself. That is very, very important. So what was the question? Is on the project.
Okay. Can you mention any one of the projects done by you using these sustainable?
So I see the sustainability varies in degree on each project. So each project will have one factor. It's a trade-off, and you are trying to now it's not only environmental sustainability people are looking at. People are looking at economic sustainability. People are looking at social sustainability. People are looking at cultural sustainability. The final design or final project is a compromise or trade-off between all these factors. When you try to make the building very environmentally sustainable, the social sustainability will go down. When you try to make a project very economically sustainable, cultural sustainability will get affected. So there is a trade-off. As a designer, as an architect, one job is to make sure that a balance is kept. And overall, the building is sustainable to the maximum possible extent. Now, when it comes to me, I don't want to point out a particular project. Whoever asks the question can go to my website and look at many of my projects. Each one is different. There are no projects where I don't have a style. I don't have a thing which I follow particularly. You can look at any other projects which I've done. Each one has varying degrees of sustainability, which will depend upon the client, upon the budget available, and upon the materials available, according to the social requirements, cultural requirements, economic resources available, and the environmental questions. And there will be cases when I would have gone wrong in certain aspects. So this is quite possible to do all these things. So I mean, there are a lot of projects you have to look at. I don't want to point out a particular project more. A lot of my projects has varying degrees of sustain. For me, everything is sustainable. I am trying to do what is, in all my projects, I try to see it is sustainable to the maximum possible extent. But if you have a client who doesn't want everything to be, so he has certain requirements, then you have to follow that because it's part of the social requirements. But if you try to find a balance between all these things, so that is when you do. So it is very different from you practicing in an academic sense, where you do get money from a NGO or government and do sustainable projects. And when you try to run an office, you need to have strike a balance between all these things. Okay. So go to my website and look at my projects.
Okay, sir, sure. So there's two participants questioning about high-rise building. The question about the same high-rise building. Most of the metropolitan cities in India are currently growing vertically. So how can we achieve sustainability in these kind of urban spaces or high-rise building? And another participant, the similar question, is it possible to go with high-rise, even skyscraper without steel and concrete, only with traditional technology?
Okay, right. I'll try to answer the second part first. Yeah. Is it possible to do without steel and concrete? Yes. I've seen buildings 6 stories, 7 stories, etc. in London 2 years ago. And I put it 2015 or 16. And I put it as a Facebook post because I met the architects who have designed those buildings. They used what is known as cross-laminated timber. It has just come into the Indian market in a very, very limited way, but very expensive. But in US, UK, they use cross-laminated timber for making buildings, multi-story apartments I've seen, office blocks I've seen. I met the architects also. I met them personally because I made that trip to London to study with them. I made my brief postings. You can just look at my Facebook post where I give a photograph the architects. I mentioned the name of the architects, etc. Now, the tallest building which is coming up, which is made with 76% timber, is called HOHO Tower, HO Tower, in Austria, in Vienna. It will be opened this year. 76% is built with timber. Very little glass, because you need to have glass to use, because you have to look outside, because it's a cold climate, and very little other materials. 76% of the entire complex, 26-story tower is built with, and it houses hotels, offices, apartments. So there is see what the problem with the Indian thing is that we don't look at many of the things which is happening outside the world, outside India. There are a lot of experiments happening. You have to keep reading, you have to keep working on it, and that is very important. So there is a possibility. So you can build without steel and concrete. But if you want to build, so tomorrow I want to build a building with timber, it is not easy because our structural engineers doesn't know how to design tall buildings with timber. Whenever I had to do complex structures with timber, I found our structural engineers also, see, for them it is easy to design a steel or concrete building. For do design, they will be able to do, but they have to look at their basic textbooks and try to work it out. And they are not very, everybody wants to go with the easy path. That is what happens in the profession also. You don't want to experiment, you don't want to explore. If you don't want to explore and experiment, then you will not be able to do any innovation in your career or your life. That is one of the problems which is happening. So that is the second part of the question. The first part of the question, I face the same question everywhere. Almost most of the 50% of the lectures or talks which I give, this question asked. What about high-rise building in the city centers? This is the question. I mean, it is a bit difficult to answer in a short talk like this, but I'll just try to give some points. In 1929, Le Corbusier, whom all of us consider as the pioneer of the modern architecture movement, the godfather and all those things, Le Corbusier wrote in his book called The City of Tomorrow. The title of the book is City of Tomorrow. It is available in Amazon books. City of Tomorrow. He said that 85% should be forest, 15% should be built up. And he said apartments should not be more than 15 stories. Office complexes can go up to 50 stories, 50. This is 1929 when he wrote the book. So he would have been, and he is making so many arguments, which I think every architecture student is a must-read book for every architecture student is Le Corbusier. He is thinking in 1929, he is arguing for all these things. There is strong arguments he's making. But what you have to understand, the arguments he's putting in 1929, and now things have undergone drastic change. When Corbusier was arguing for these multi-storied high-rise buildings, he was telling, we have a technology to solve we don't have to design according to the local climate. We have a technology which is called air conditioning, or heating, by which we can artificially create the environment. Why should we design according to the climate? That is the argument which has been put forward by Corbusier and his team. But now we know, in the 70s, we know that we don't have the energy to artificially create the environment. We are in shortage of energy. And we are having limitations. The fossil fuel is limited. When the book Limits to Growth came in 1972, all these things became, the energy crisis became a point to be made. Also, one more point, Corbusier said 15% should be built up, 85% should be free. What you see, the kind of projects which have come up even in OMR and Delhi, Ghaziabad and those places, Hong Kong, 85% is built up and 15% is left as open spaces. Where is the space for children to play? Where you need open, we saw during COVID time, you can see Himalayas from Jalandhar, or this is available for these places. This is the situation you are seeing. But then there was a time, now things have changed. So but what was followed by Corbusier's followers were not according to what Corbusier has said. And this is that. Now, Charles Correa in his book has strongly argued for two-story building. His book is, you read the book called The New Landscape, he has argued for two. Hatko has made a study in the late 70s or early 80s on how it's necessary to build two-story buildings is enough to do. We don't need multi-story buildings. There are so many architects across the world who said multi-story buildings are not required. There are a lot of others. Christopher Alexander, Pattern Language, in his book on pattern language, he says the residences should not more than 4 stories, not because we don't have the technology. He said a mother should be able to call the child in the ground floor and the voice will not go for more than 40 feet distance. So he said, Christopher and his team in his book on pattern language, he said apartments should not be more than 4 stories. There are so many studies done that if you want to get a cheapest accommodation in London, it is the apartments, or in Europe, it is apartments. Many of the buildings which has been done in 1960s has been demolished by controlled just like the flats in Kochi was demolished. They demolished building because there are no takers. Many of the flats in US was demolished. All this we know that there are no takers for it. So just building is the solution, is never going to be the right. You have to see what has happened to the apartments in all these places. The apartments are not being demolished because they are not durable. There are no takers for it. So there are a lot of social issues, cultural issues for all these multi-storied apartments. So unless we address these issues, and in sustainability, we have to look at the holistic picture and what is required. So it's not just solving the problem of the building space alone and building these multi-storied buildings alone. We have to look at so many other aspects. The building apartments which are built in the 1970s and 1980s will have to be demolished because some of the real estate prices of some of those apartments have come down so low in Chennai that you don't even get the land value. There are no takers for apartments. Although the Gemini flyover, that Parson complex, the per square foot price of an apartment is come down drastically. Nobody wants to stay there. Although it is the heart, this Chennai city center is there, but an apartment complex there, I mean, people don't want to live there. Cheap. It is available at a much cheaper rate. So why is this happening? So we have to look at so when we look at sustainability, we have to look at social sustainability, cultural sustainability, and all those things. So if you look at that, you will decide not to build. If you build multi-storied apartments, it has to be built with 85% open space because your children also need. Small children doesn't have a place to play. Crime rates, there are studies done where the crime rates in apartments are higher, divorce rates are higher. There are a lot of studies, but that will be regional studies which has been done. So I don't, and you have to not look at the apartments. You have to look at how much city has to pay for the traffic congestion, how much the city has to pay for the drainage, how much the city has to pay for the putting up all the other facilities. You have a two-storied building with a single bedroom, and you demolish it. I mean, a single family staying, you demolish it and put 50 units in that land. The city has to pay for all the services. City paying means each one of us has to pay for the services. Is the builder who is building it paying for it? No. City is paying for it. Each of us taxpayers' money is used for it. I'm not saying that. Everybody has to look at it in a holistic picture, and that is what is required to be done. I try to answer it there are so many books written on this topic. There are a lot of materials available in the internet on these topics. Please go through and read it, and you will see that building multi-storied buildings in the heart of the city is not as simple as we think. Okay. I hope I'm able to answer to.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely. One participant wants to know, why was it called as a rat trap bond?
See, if rats get into that brickwork, it will not be able to get out, but it will be able to move all around. It can go from ground zero level to if it is a 10-foot high wall, it can go up to the 10 feet high. So that might be the reason. I don't know who has given. Baker has given this word. I don't know. He's the first one to use in India, I think. So because I don't think in England they would have called it cavity wall. They would not have called it a rat trap wall. Yeah.
So next question, sir. What are the practical challenges of using vernacular architecture in the current conditions, like in 2020?
See, anything which you want to deviate from the ordinary or what is normally done is not very easy. Anything. I mean, I will say, I have been doing buildings with a vernacular architecture flavor for the last 30 years, or using many of these techniques. So when I did Dakshina Chitra 25 years ago, there were no takers. There was not a demand. But now there are hundreds of people who wants to experiment. When I did a workshop, architectural workshop, when Dakshina Chitra was being constructed, I think it was 1995 summer vacation. We wrote to all the schools of architecture that Any architecture student can come and learn about all these techniques. We will give free food, we will give free accommodation. Any students can come and learn. This is 1995 summer vacation when we were building. The 1996 Dakshinatra was inaugurated. So just before that, summer vacation. I think 1996 summer vacation it will be. Only 2 students applied, which shows how the architectural community took to a attitude towards vernacular architecture in 1996. And not very far off, in 2004, I did my architectural workshops on vernacular architecture. I've been doing it at regular intervals. Now the number of people who, in spite of the fees and no accommodation being given, in spite of the fees, we are not able to accommodate all the people who apply for this. So there is a change which has happened in the Indian architecture scene. I mean, there was no paper on vernacular architecture really. Now, at least I think most of the colleges offer it as an elective at least.
Yes, yes.
So all these changes are happening. See, I will say as one who practices all these techniques, it is so simple. There is no complexity. It is very, very easy. It is very, very easy to do these things. Not at all complex to do these things. But there is a factor called the fear of the unknown. If you don't know something, then you think that it is very difficult and very complex to do it. But once you know how to do it, how can we break this barrier of how can we break this fear of the unknown? Vernacular architecture is very easy. If masons and carpenters and the local villagers can do it every day, why can't what is so complex about it? What is so difficult about it? And it's very sustainable also. So, I have been surviving on it. I mean, my office runs on some of these things. Our office was surviving, but I think it is now there are so many youngsters have come forward, and you just have to go and do it. You will be successful. Yeah.
There's one last question. What is your take on CSEB?
Yeah. You see the compressed stabilized earth blocks, CSEB. If we can use the mud earth blocks without adding any cement and compressing it, it is the most sustainable. The moment you try to compress it without adding cement, then it has become a little bit more expensive, becomes slightly less expensive, slightly less sustainable. The moment you add cement to compress or some earth blocks, then it becomes less sustainable. It is still sustainable, but it becomes less sustainable. The amount of cement you add it, suppose you are adding 4%. It depends on the soil condition, the amount of cement that you are. Suppose you add only 4% cement, then that is sustainable. But if you have to add 10% cement, it becomes less sustainable. So that is what I'm trying to say. There is a gradation of sustainability in earth blocks itself, depending on what you are going to do. Suppose your earth has to be transported 100 kilometers, then it becomes less sustainable. Earth is available locally, more sustainable. Earth has to be transported 50 kilometers, somewhere in between. So you have to look at all these parameters. That is why I try to say, and also you have to see that by using earth blocks, you are saving only the superstructure cost. You are using a sustainable technology only for the superstructure. You are using a concrete slab, which is conventional. You are using the foundation, which is conventional. You are using the flooring, which is conventional. It doesn't. So there is a small amount of sustainability by using it, whereas somebody might not use earth blocks, but they might be using timber in a large quantity, and they might be using reused burn bricks for their house. Then that can be more sustainable than the earth blocks. So don't just jump into conclusions by just doing it. If I'm using burn bricks, which is already used, it has made its impact on the environment. You are reusing it. We're using burn bricks. from a building which is demolished, then it is might be more sustainable than the CSEB. So just don't get, somehow it is a mindset of the people that if you use earth, even if it is you add 15% cement to it, and even if you transport it over a long distance, it is more sustainable than other things. No. You have to look at things in a holistic manner. Unfortunately, in India, this discussion is not happening. People are not getting aware of students are not exposed to much wider awareness on sustainability. I hope I try to give my answer on CSEB.
Yes, sir.
I will use CSEB. I'm not against CSEB. I built more than 100 buildings with CSEB blocks.
Okay.
So I'm not there. So I use all kinds of techniques. I use stone in some places. I use brick in some places. I use CSEB in some places. I use timber in some places. So it depends on the location and the context and what you do. That is why if you look at my website, all my projects uses different kinds of things. Also, I give importance to my client. If my client says that I don't want mud blocks or earth blocks, then social sustainability and social acceptability plays a major part. So you have to take all those aspects into account. I'm trying to see it in a much interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach. Okay. So I think
I've covered all the questions posted by the audience in both Zoom as well as in the YouTube live streaming. Thank you so much, sir, for showing us a beautiful presentation and for an interactive live session for more than an hour and answering all the questions so patiently. It is definitely a wonderful opportunity for all of us to hear about the life of the great legend architectural journey. On behalf of Faculty of Architecture, Dr.MGR University, I would like to thank you personally for accepting our invitation, also for giving us an enlightening insight on Laurie Baker vision and perspective from your first-hand experience. I take this opportunity to thank all the participants from different parts of states in India and across the world for participating in today's session and being so patient till the end. Looking forward to reconnect back with you all for the next upcoming sessions.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I also enjoyed it. I hope we have been able to communicate, because now it is important to communicate with the younger generation, because they only will be able to do something.
Yes, sir, definitely.
All of the middle-aged and old-aged to people like me, etc., it will be possible for us to make any further changes. The younger generation will be able to do. I hope that we have to debate quite a bit on all these aspects. I try to put, as I said, I learned from Laurie Baker. So, but I try to take it beyond that is what I try to do it in my career. And that is what I try to share with all of you in the presentation. So thank you all. Thank you for a wonderful session.
Thank you, sir. It was really inspiring. Thanks a lot for accepting our invitation too.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, sir. Bye.